people who are at odds with each other? And then beyond that, how do you keep empathy from becoming just kind of relentless relativism?
It's a whopper of a question.
Hey, man, you're going to be a professor.
Yeah. You know, I mean, I think that the empathy part, I don't know, I mean, not to trivialize, I think I'm a pretty empathetic guy, you know, I mean, well, I mean, from a, you know, if writing is kind of an exercise in manipulation, you know, to the extent that I want people to view this large thing in the way that I view it, but without coming out and saying this is how I view it, then just from a strategy standpoint, if you don't write about people and all of their complexity, that kind of makes for a boring book potentially. I mean, you sort of put an obstacle in your own way, I think. The other thing is, you know, I had spent time in 3 different towns, 2 other ones before I got to this one, and had been only in varying degrees able to insinuate myself into them. And one of the things that was lacking in the other 2 is I wasn't able to find a cast of people who I really liked. And if you're going to do something that takes 4 years and requires, you know, weeks and weeks at a time of being with these people, if you can't like them, I don't know how you can write about them. And so the empathy part was really just kind of I think an organic kind of outflow of that. I don't remember the other part of the question.
Well, the other part is about how you keep compassion from becoming relativism, in the sense that I think your point in the book about the effect of deindustrialization and the terrifying lobbying power you describe of the big pharmaceutical companies, which, and this is one of the most arresting parts of the book, you find out they put all their muscle in Washington to making sure that the over-the-counter drug medications that are used to make meth stay widely available, knowing this is the consequence. Really, really scary and disturbing to read that. But that in talking about these larger forces, that it doesn't become a way of removing any sense of personal responsibility from individuals who, yes, are addicted and to that extent out of control, but are also in very real ways both the product but also the agent of the destruction of their hometown.
Yeah, I mean, I guess when you say relativist, I don't define that a little bit more for me. I guess
that it's terrible what's happened to them, which it is, and there's no one reading the book could come to any other conclusion, and that because it's terrible, and because meth, because it provides, as you very vividly describe the psychopharmacology, this high, this happiness that's absent in the rest of their lives and it becomes irreplaceable, and because it also provides an income where there are few other incomes,
right,
to, you know, remotely to match it, that because of that we should feel for them but not in any way pass judgment upon them.
Yeah.
And yet they are, as I said, I mean, you're also vivid about the fact that they're wrecking their own town. Yeah. In certain ways too. So how do you sort of parse that line as a writer and as someone with a moral imagination?
You know, I mean, I think that, you know, the job of a journalist obviously is to take the long view, you know, and to fit smaller things into a bigger picture, but those smaller things are individual lives, and I guess honestly, I mean, I in addition to the fact I watched too much soccer today, that's why I'm a little bit slow.
All right, I'll give you the yellow card.
Yes, yeah, give me a yellow card. I didn't ever think about it like that, and there were certain reviews and things and even emails that I got, phone calls that I got from people who I had never met, who, it sort of took me to task by saying, at the end of the day, you can say as much as you want that these were people who were driven by larger forces to do things that were ultimately individually and collectively destructive. But you're not allowed to excuse that. And I don't feel like I did excuse it. I just, to me, it was when I met Roland Jarvis, I knew I had kind of a, he's pretty much a home run. I'm sorry to say it. It's like this is a guy who had been working in the meat packing plant for a long time. He had 4 kids and cooked meth in his mother's house, in the basement of his mother's house, 38-year-old man, and literally blew himself up, blew his mother's house up, and melted alive, essentially, and managed to live. Had 4 heart attacks while he was convalescing in the burn unit for 3 months, and came home and had no fingers left anymore to be able to shoot up, so he taught himself how to smoke meth, taught himself how to light a lighter with these sort of nubbins that he had left, and we'd sit around his house with literally his mother in the kitchen playing gin rummy with the neighbor, drinking beer, and he would tell me his stories, and she would lean out from they smoked a lot, and would say, Roland, make sure you tell the man the truth now, and so there's no temptation to make that man into caricature. The difficulty is to not make him into a caricature. And so I think that the long form answer to your question, excuse me for rambling, is that this whole thing is potentially so couched in the notion of caricature because it's the Midwest, and because people think, it's grain elevators and railroad tracks and nice people and shit like that, and that's it. Life's more complicated, man. It doesn't square that way. It may square that way visually, but it doesn't square that way intellectually. And so, my motivation was probably to work against what you're talking about abidingly.
Mm-hmm. Who were the writers who influenced you in doing this kind of a book?
I'm the most poorly read writer that ever lived. I really am, man.
Well, I know this great bookstore on Broadway and 12th.
Yeah. We were my publicist and I went to a couple bookstores in Brooklyn today, and people were asking me the same question, and because I didn't have a microphone and I had the excuse of not wanting to be late to watch Spain play Portugal, I could get out of that. I can't really get out of it now as easy. I think, I'll be honest with you, the last book that I read was Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy, and I read that 7 times, and I think it's one of the finest pieces of literature ever written. I really do. In terms of influences, I think, pretty much what I read the New Yorker every week, and I read the Times every day. And when I start doing a book, I in fear of metabolizing what I'm reading so much that it begins to write the book in a voice that's not mine, then I really shut down the doors. I don't. I don't know. Does it sound really crappy to say I don't think I had many influences? I mean,
you're the one who would know best.
Yeah.
I want to ask you 2 other questions, and then we'll open it wide. One is, if you ever felt fearful or in danger during the reporting of this book, because you were around some fairly both physically dangerous in the sense of being in treacherous situations, or emotionally dangerous in the sense of being asked either to take sides in just an attitudinal way, or either being asked to inform or being perceived potentially as an informant by people who are already paranoid because they're on binges.
Right.
So that's one part, is sort of the fear factor. And then the other one, and I don't want this to sound flip, although I guess, having, boasted my, few Midwest bona fides before, now I'll revert to being the New York snob that I am, and say that when you think about, I don't mean this to sound flip, but maybe it'll sound flip, when you think about people on drug, all-night speedy drug binges, you think of Bright Lights, Big City, or, in the New York context, you think of people coming out of clubs at 5 in the morning, or a city that, if there's a crack dealer is in Clockers, that there's something going on at all hours. What the heck is the experience of being in a small town on a binge, on a bender, when you're up for days on end, when it's 3, 4, 5, 5:30 in the morning, in a town that doesn't have downtown?
Right. I mean, in terms of like any sort of, emotional danger, I think that one of the things, this from doing this immersion stuff, there's a lot of boredom, man. I mean, you spend a lot of time in the Super 8 motel. I mean, literally like days there waiting for somebody who will, you go to Roland Jarvis's house and he's not there when he says he's going to be, so you go back home and that's your day. It's like, what the hell what do you do? I mean, my answer, unfortunately, at that time was to go buy another pack of cigarettes and wait him out, I mean, so I suppose that's sort of the undercurrent of your question. It's like I probably inched my way toward lung cancer for 4 years, but for me, I think the difficult part was that it made me see my home in a way that I never had. And when I say home, I sort of mean, I sort of extrapolate that onto the region, and that was hard. I mean, it was really it was hard, and it was. I tried to sort of compartmentalize it by saying, okay, if you're a guy who's from here and you moved away, and I wanted to go home so bad when I was writing this book. I'd been in New York for 12 years. I'd been away for 18, half my life, and I wanted to go home so bad, man. But it wasn't the place that I knew, and so my defense against that was to say, well, if you're a guy who's from here and you're surprised by what you're seeing, well, then that has to be a part of the book. That has to be a sort of intellectually, that has to be a driving force, But it was difficult, I mean, these are people that I knew. I mean, I didn't know them personally until I'd spent 4 years with them, but I knew. It's people I grew up with, and so. In terms of like any kind of physical danger or anything like that, people ask me all the time, like, well, did you do meth? I say no. I say, well, how can you write a book about meth if you didn't do meth? It's like, well, I mean, Truman Capote didn't have to kill a family in Kansas in order to write about it, I mean, like, and so there was never that danger.
No, I hadn't particularly thought of that one. I mean, if anything, because your description of meth's addictive qualities and the effect would scare anybody off.
Yes, it was not an attractive option for me. There were, I tell you, I was never felt physically threatened in Oelwein at all, but the town where I started this whole deal, which was in Idaho, and I had gone out there to do a magazine story, and it was a town that had a lot of meth in it back in '99, and that's where I became fascinated with this whole story. And I actually spent months doing the same thing in that town in Idaho that I would ultimately do in Iowa, and wasn't able to sell a book about it. And so the whole thing sort of came to naught. But